People are encountering humanoids every day, all different types, some you've never even heard of. In this video, I'm going to be discussing some of these cases. A snowball fight culminates in an encounter of the creepy kind. February 15, 1986, Big Bear Lake, San Bernardino County, California, just off Highway 18. 5 people, consisting of 3 brothers and 2 close friends, arrived late on Friday night for a weekend ski trip. It was 1:30 a.m. and the snow was falling heavily as they pulled up to their cottage. Being young and from the city, the 5 friends decided to take advantage of their isolated woodsy surroundings. They elected to remain outside, throwing snowballs, making snow angels, and generally goofing around. At some point, one of the friends noticed something strange. Given that they were out in the woods in the middle of a winter storm, very late in the evening, the last thing they expected to see was somebody watching them, but that's exactly what was happening. On the road there was a person or something standing there quietly. It looked like a tall man in thick, winter-type clothes. It was dark, so it was all black against the snow on the road, but it was heavy-looking. It was at least 6 feet tall, maybe taller. It was heavy-looking and all one color. At this point, none of us were playing anymore, and we started to get scared. We were frozen looking at this thing, and I yelled, "Hey, who is standing there?" or something like that. I didn't get any response at all. Then I yelled, "If you're human, say something," and still no response. So then we got really scared. The 5 friends stood watching the large creature for a few more seconds before turning and rushing into their cottage, where they remained for the rest of the night. It is unclear if they found tracks or had any other interactions with this strange entity over the course of the weekend. It's interesting to note that at least 2 books have been published detailing all the strange events that have occurred at Big Bear Lake. Bigfoots, ET encounters, and ghosts have all been documented in that location. I got a sick feeling is how one woman described her encounter with a hairy bipedal creature one night. It was September 2016, South Dakota. A woman named Brandy claims that she was returning home from work one evening. Due to construction, she was forced to take another, more out-of-the-way route home. While driving, doing the speed limit, she claims a strange creature suddenly appeared and rammed her vehicle. Out of nowhere, this creature with dark-looking shaggy fur came running out of the field on my right on 4 long skinny legs. I swear it stood chest high. It was running sideways like a gorilla, like it was running with the intent to slam into me, and it did. It slammed into my van with its shoulder, hard enough to make my van swerve into the other lane. And it felt like I ran over something, so I almost slowed down with the intent to check on the creature, but I got a sick feeling in my gut, and that image replayed in my head, and has a dozen times, and I sped up. When she finally got home, she felt uneasy and slept in the living room with all the windows closed and covered. When she woke up the next day, she went outside and examined her van. She found no dents in the van, but in one of the tires, she found some long brown hair. Later that day, she returned to the area to look for the creature she might have hit, but found nothing. I drove real slow past the place it happened, but there was no animal on the side of the road. This happened about 8 to 10 miles from my house. That night and the following night, my dogs were going nuts all night long. So she's seen this creature, come, out of the woods, and it ran towards her car and rammed it. And she said it hit her with such force that it actually like pushed her car into the other lane. You have to wonder what kind of a creature could have that much strength that they could actually move a vehicle like that. And she claims that she thinks she drove over it, but when she went back the next day, there was nothing there. It's unclear if whatever it was she hit, limped off on its own, or if it had been picked up by something. Moving on to a creature of another kind. In my previous video, I discussed how two men had encountered a strange entity in Lafleur Cemetery in Saskatchewan. They described it as almost transparent. In recent years, there has been an uptick in sightings of an entity described as looking transparent or cloaked. He has been nicknamed the Glimmer Man and the Predator, a nod to the 80s sci-fi movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, in which the alien creature utilizes a cloaking technology in order to camouflage himself. A man in New Mexico described the night he had a frightening encounter with one of these beings. It was 2006, Deming, New Mexico. A man named Abel claims that he was watching television inside his mobile home when he suddenly heard a loud banging on the roof of his trailer. To him, it sounded like a loud wind mixed with loud tapping. It eventually subsided, and he decided to brush it off and carry on watching television. Later, when his show ended, he decided to head outside and investigate. He stepped outside into the night, lit a cigarette, and then glanced around. He saw nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, he heard a whistling sound coming from the woods in front of his trailer. He looked, but could see nothing. The whistling happened again, only this time it was coming from his left-hand side. He peered into the darkness and again saw nothing, at first. As he looked around trying to make sense of the sounds he was hearing, Abel spotted something out of the corner of his eye. Looking toward the roof of his trailer, he could make out the outline of a human-like shape, seemingly crouched down, looking down at him. Upon realizing that it had been seen, the entity suddenly stood up. Abel claims the entity was transparent. He could actually see the stars through him. He could make out the outline, a sort of glossy reflection similar to the Predator. It appeared to stand about 5'10" or 5'11" and was muscular. Suddenly, a red light lit up in between where the eyes would be, and the entity completely vanished. This frightened Abel, who bolted inside his house and locked the doors. He cautiously looked out a window at the rear of his home and observed a, quote, red light steadily going into the sky. Later, Abel, still spooked by what he had seen, decided to drive over to his friend's house and tell him what had happened. As they sat talking, Abel spotted a black Suburban, one with a light or a strobe on the top of it. He watched as it pulled across the street from his friend's home and flashed a light 2 times directly at the house. Thinking back on it, Abel believes that he observed some kind of advanced U.S. military cloaking technology being tested that night. "I don't think I was supposed to see that," he noted. This isn't the first time I've discussed MIBs flashing strobe lights at people. I have to wonder if they had somehow erased more of Abel's memory than he realized with those lights. I also have to question Abel's assumption that the transparent entity he saw over his home was some type of military test. Why test it out on some random guy trying to watch TV in his mobile home? What of the red light seen floating away? What of the strange sounds he heard? What of the black SUV and the strange flashes of light? It hardly sounds like military testing to me. In the same vein as this encounter, I would like to discuss another type of entity people are seeing. He's described as filled with hazy static, the kind you would see when your television station goes off the air. Paranormal researchers have nicknamed him appropriately the Static Man. For a young man in Louisiana, he would come face to face with this entity. It was 1998, Louisiana. A man named Keith, who was, at the time, quite young, recalled that it was 10 p.m. He was in his room playing his Nintendo game, GoldenEye, when he spotted something strange. I was sitting on the top bunk of my bed. I had one of those old TVs you had to turn on with the pliers. You had to use them to turn the channels. It was sitting on the tall dresser. Between the TV and the bunk bed was a space of about 5 feet in between. I was playing GoldenEye when I noticed a human shape standing in front of the TV and the bunk bed. It was so close to me, I could not move. I felt like if I would have moved, it would have moved with me. It had that predator outline, like in the movies. It stood about 6 feet tall, very slim, and looked like static, like you'd see in one of those old televisions when the cable goes out. I was so afraid, the only thing I could do was to call my little brother to come into the room and tell him to turn on the lights. As he ran into the room and turned on the lights, it disappeared. That was the last time I saw something like that. Kind of makes you wonder what these static men are. Are they like ghosts or something? Are they like a shadow man, but instead of it being black, it's this staticky image? Are they extraterrestrials? Are they possibly interdimensional beings, kind of like trapped in between our world and theirs? I've been reading more and more of these kinds of static man stories. I find them fascinating. I don't really know what they are. Generally, people are frightened in their presence, but I haven't heard any stories where they've actually harmed anyone, so I don't know. Another type of entity has also been reported more frequently in the past few years. This one, in my opinion, is far more frightening. It is described as half human, half deer, huge with red glowing eyes and hooves for feet. In Virginia, a man claims one of these beings appeared out of the darkness of the night and actually attempted to speak to him. It was the fall of 2017, Orange, Virginia. The witness, a man named Paul, was sitting out back on his patio one evening, smoking a cigarette and talking to his friend on his cell phone. It was around 10 o'clock at night. The yard goes back really steep down to the lake here, and there's a lot of woods and stuff in between, brush, and it's pretty thick. Well, suddenly I heard something running across the yard there, right through all the thick brush. I said, "What was that?" My friend was like, "What?" I said, "I don't know, something just ran through the yard. It was big, whatever it was." Paul assumed that it might have been a deer, even though he had never seen a deer in that spot before. He eventually brushed it off and carried on talking. Suddenly he heard a noise down by his dock. I was like, there it is again. For some reason, my first thought was, there's some kids playing around down there. I don't know why I thought that, but that's the first thing I thought. Anyway, I got up and I went running over towards the stairs to go down to the dock. And there's steep stairs. And when I get to the stairs, I get to the top of them and I look down, and there's this thing running up the stairs towards me. And I was just in shock. It was like, it was a person, but it had a deer head. It was running up the stairs so fast. It was crazy that it could even move that fast, and it was staring right at me. And I'm just standing there, and I'm staring at it, and it had red eyes. It actually had red eyes. Paul claims that the creature ran right up to him and began to speak. It kept staring me in the eyes, and I was staring right back at its eyes, just kind of in shock, I guess. When it got right up to me, it actually said something which I don't know what it said. I just know it said something like 4 or 5 syllables really fast. It seemed like it said words, but I don't know what they were. And then it ran right. It just kept running and ran right by me. I could have touched it. It was within inches of me. The stairway is only 4 feet across. Paul was afraid to tell anybody, and the few friends he did tell suggested that he might have had a type of elaborate prank pulled on him, something that Paul denied. I had hardly told anybody about this because it was just the craziest thing I have ever seen. That's what someone suggested, but I said no, it was moving way too fast. It was. It was moving so fast that when I thought about it later, I was like, man, it was almost like in a different dimension or something. That's all I could think. He noted that the being had a human-like body. He did not notice any clothes, though he admits it was quite dark and was mostly focused on its eyes. He noted that the head was very much deer-like, but its antlers appeared different than those of the deers he had seen in the area. The antlers weren't like any deer around here. They weren't like the white-tailed deer here. They were more spindly. They were spindly, and there was a lot more like ties or branches than normal than they have around here. I actually saw a branch once, and I was like, oh my god, that branch looks like one of the antlers on that thing I saw. For a long time after the encounter, Paul found himself too frightened to actually venture down to the dock at night. It took him a long time to get over his fear. So the witness claims that this entity had said something to him. He could not make out what it had said to him. It was he described it as 4 or 5 syllables. He said it was a language he didn't understand. I have to wonder what it was saying to him. I've read of other cases in which creatures speak to people and they don't understand what they're saying. It's like they're speaking a language that they just don't understand. This is the first time I think I've ever heard of a deerman speaking. I have read of dogmen speaking and werewolves or whatever, and I've heard of even a Bigfoot story where it spoke to a witness. But I've never heard of a deerman speaking, so I thought that was an interesting detail.